Do Judean and Jewish traditions vary? Yes. Significant differences exist in how the Torah and Talmud are taught and practiced outside of European or Ashkenazi traditions. These differences range from using entirely different languages and scriptures to, well, rejecting the Talmud altogether. The Beta Israel community preserved an ancient form of Judaism that actually predates the writing of the Talmud. No Talmud until their recent arrival in Israel. The Beta Israel had no knowledge of the oral law or the Talmud. The Orit, instead of a traditional Hebrew Torah scroll, they used the Orit, which is the 5 books of Moses translated into Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian liturgical language. Different laws, because they follow only biblical law. They historically practiced animal sacrifice and did not observe rabbinic holidays like Hanukkah or Purim. They also follow stricter Sabbath laws, historically believing the sanctity of the day must be preserved even if it risks a human life, whereas the Talmud permits breaking the Sabbath to save a life. Karaite Judaism emerged in the Middle East, specifically in what's now Iraq and Egypt, and it explicitly rejects the Talmud as a man-made work. Sola Scriptura, they believe only the written Torah, the Tanakh, is divine. Interpretation, while rabbinic Jews use the Talmud to explain the Torah, Karaites believe every individual has the duty to study the text directly and determine its meaning using the plain sense of the words. Practical differences: because they reject Talmudic interpretations, they do not wear tefillin or phylacteries, do not use mezuzot on doorposts, and have different rules for the calendar and Sabbath. For instance, they traditionally spend the Sabbath in darkness because the Torah forbids kindling a fire, whereas the Talmud permits using a fire lit before the Sabbath starts. While these groups do follow the Talmud, their method of study and legal application is, honestly, a bit different from the European or Ashkenazi style. Practicality versus abstraction. Sephardic and Mizrahi Talmud study often focuses on reaching a practical legal conclusion, or halacha. In contrast, the Ashkenazi Lamdus method often focuses on abstract logical puzzles and theoretical debates that may have no practical application. Language and rites: these communities historically used Judeo-Arabic or Ladino, which is Judeo-Spanish, for their commentaries and prayers. Their synagogues often incorporate Middle Eastern architectural and decorative styles, like geometric and floral motifs, rather than European-style iconography. Samaritans are a distinct group in the Middle East that claims descent from the ancient Israelites but is separate from mainstream Judaism. The Samaritans use their own version of the Torah, which is written in the Paleo-Hebrew script. It actually contains about 6,000 differences from the standard Jewish or Masoretic Torah. One major difference is a commandment to build an altar on Mount Gerizim rather than in Jerusalem. They also reject the Talmud and even the later books of the Hebrew Bible, like the prophets and the writings, considering them uninspired. The Orit is the sacred scripture of the Beta Israel, or Ethiopian Jews, and it's written in the ancient Semitic language of Ge'ez. Unlike the rabbinic Judaism found in Europe and the Middle East, Beta Israel tradition just doesn't include the Talmud. Instead, their way of life follows a pre-Talmudic, or biblical model, that really closely mirrors Jewish life during the Second Temple period, which was roughly from 516 BCE to 70 CE. The word Orit probably comes from the Aramaic word Orita, meaning Torah. While rabbinic Jews have a 24-book Hebrew Bible, the Orit is actually broader. It often includes the Octateuch, the first 8 books, and other texts like the Book of Enoch and Jubilees. These were discarded by other Jewish branches but preserved in Ethiopia. Because the Beta Israel didn't have the fences around the law that the Talmud created, their rules are often more literal and, sometimes even stricter than rabbinic law. Ritual purity is just the cornerstone of life for Beta Israel. For example, after childbirth, following a literal reading of Leviticus 12, a mother must live in a separate hut, called a mergem gojo, for 40 days after the birth of a boy and 80 days after a girl. When it comes to menstruation, women separate themselves for 7 days in a special hut. They only return after a ritual immersion in a river. Historically, the Beta Israel practiced something called atunkun, which means do not touch me. Touching a non-Jew or their food was considered a source of ritual impurity, and you'd need to immerse before returning to the community. On the Sabbath, the Orit tradition forbids using any fire, even one lit before the Sabbath. This is actually different from rabbinic law, so Ethiopian Jews traditionally spent the Sabbath in darkness and only ate cold food. Some traditions even held that the sanctity of the Sabbath had to be preserved, even if it put a human life at risk. That's a pretty stark contrast to the Talmudic rule, where saving a life overrides the Sabbath. On the topic of meat and milk, the Orit tradition takes the ban on boiling a kid in its mother's milk literally. So, they historically allowed eating meat with dairy, like chicken with butter, as long as it wasn't the specific mother's milk. That's a practice that's strictly forbidden in the Talmud. And, until the late 20th century, the Beta Israel continued the ancient practice of animal sacrifice, specifically the Paschal lamb on Passover, which mainstream Judaism stopped after the destruction of the temple. Instead of rabbis, the Beta Israel community is led by Kesach, singular, Kes, who function much like the biblical Kohanim, or priests. These leaders are the living repositories of the Orit and handle all legal and religious disputes within the community. The house of prayer is called a masjid, or synagogue, and unlike European synagogues, worshippers remove their shoes before entering, since the building is considered a miniature temple and holy ground. There's also a unique holiday called Sigd, celebrated 50 days after Yom Kippur. It commemorates the renewal of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. The community fasts and climbs a mountain to hear the Kesach read from the Orit, symbolizing the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The First Temple period, which lasted from about 957 BCE to 586 BCE, is actually older than the Beta Israel's Orit traditions. This era is often called Biblical Judaism, and it was a sacrificial and priestly religion centered on the temple in Jerusalem. During the First Temple period, there wasn't a single book like the modern Bible or the Orit. Most laws were passed down orally, while some elements of the Torah, like the Ten Commandments, already existed. The complete 5-book Torah wasn't finalized until the Persian period, which was the 5th century BCE. The Bible actually records a huge moment in 622 BCE, when a book of the law, probably a version of Deuteronomy, was found in the temple. This discovery sparked a major religious reform that aimed to centralize worship in Jerusalem. Unlike later Rabbinic Judaism, which focuses on studying texts like the Talmud and prayer, life in the First Temple era was really defined by ritual sacrifice. Priests, known as Kohanim, not rabbis, were the only religious leaders. They took care of the Ark of the Covenant, which was kept in the temple's Holy of Holies, and contained the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. Forgiveness and celebration were achieved through animal, cereal, and liquid offerings. Archaeological evidence and biblical texts Both suggest that many of the standard Jewish practices we know today didn't exist yet in their current forms. For example, there's no evidence from this period of tefillin, mezuzot, or special fringes called tzitzit. Early Israelites often practiced monolatry, which means worshiping one God, Yahweh, while still acknowledging the existence of other gods, instead of the strict universal monotheism that came later. And because the focus was on the conquest and defense of the land, the religion had some warlike features, with God often portrayed as a warrior marching with the Israelite army. The Beta Israel or Ethiopian Jews are often seen by scholars as a living bridge to this ancient past. They managed to preserve the strict ritual purity and priestly leadership of the First Temple era, staying isolated from the rabbinic revolution that changed mainstream Judaism after the Temple's destruction. The shift from the First Temple period, around 957 to 586 BCE, to the arrival of Europeans in the Middle East and Africa, brought about a huge linguistic change. Localized Semitic tongues were gradually replaced by imperial and trade languages such as Aramaic, Arabic, and Amharic. In the roughly 2,500 years between the First Temple and the modern era, the linguistic landscape moved from a mix of distinct Semitic dialects to just a handful of dominant superlanguages. During and after the First Temple period, Biblical Hebrew, which started as a Northwest Semitic dialect, slowly stopped being a spoken language and was replaced by Aramaic. Aramaic became the main language of the Neo-Assyrian and Achaemenid, or Persian, empires, dominating the Middle East for nearly 1,000 years. After the Islamic conquests in the 7th century CE, Arabic quickly replaced most other Semitic languages across North Africa and the Middle East, including Aramaic and Coptic Egyptian. In Africa, Semitic languages brought over from southern Arabia around 800 to 1000 BCE evolved into Ge'ez. By the 10th century CE, Ge'ez was no longer spoken in daily life and became a liturgical language, kind of like Latin. It was replaced by Amharic and Tigrinya for everyday conversation. Your point about Africa stretching farther refers to a time when Afro-Asiatic cultures, including Semitic-speaking groups, had a different geographic reach. Some scholars actually argue that the entire Semitic language family started in the Horn of Africa, like Ethiopia or Eritrea, or maybe even the Central Sahara, before moving into the Middle East. Before the Bantu expansion, which was roughly 1000 BCE to 1000 CE, much of southern and eastern Africa was home to Khoisan and Cushitic speakers. As Bantu-speaking groups moved south and east, they took over huge areas, completely changing the continent's cultural map, all before any European contact. By the time Europeans set up major colonies in the 16 to 1800s, the region was already a complex tapestry, with Arabic-influenced North Africa and the Levant, and an Amharic-dominated Ethiopian empire. If you look at it by era, in the First Temple period, the Levant and Mesopotamia had Biblical Hebrew, Phoenician, and Akkadian, while the Horn of Africa had Proto-Ethio-Semitic or early South Arabian. By Classical and Late Antiquity, Aramaic and Greek were common, while Ge'ez was spoken in the Kingdom of Aksum. In the Middle Ages, after the 7th century, Arabic took over much of the Middle East, and Amharic, Tigrinya, and Ge'ez were used in Ethiopia and Eritrea. By European contact in the 1800s, Arabic dialects, Ottoman Turkish, and modern Hebrew were present in the Middle East, while Amharic, Ge'ez, and Oromo were used in the Horn of Africa. Historically, languages like Ge'ez and Biblical Hebrew are sister languages. They aren't mutually intelligible, but they do share deep roots like the words for water, house, and head. The Torah and Talmud actually prohibited eating pork long before Arabic influence arrived in the Middle East. This ban is a core part of European Jewish law that predates both the arrival of Islam in northern Africa and the presence of Europeans in ancient Israel. The prohibition on pork is clearly spelled out in the European-based Torah, which is based on the 5 books of Moses, or the Orit. Most scholars think these books were written down between 600 and 300 BCE. Leviticus chapter 11, verses 7 and 8, declares the pig unclean because while it has split hooves, it doesn't chew its cud. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 8, repeats the commandment saying Israelites shouldn't eat their flesh or even touch their carcasses. The Talmud, which is the central text of Jewish law and was compiled in Europe between about 200 and 500 CE, made these prohibitions even stronger, even including a curse on anyone who raises pigs. During the Roman and Greco-Roman periods, which were centuries before the 7th century Islamic expansion, avoiding pork was already the most recognizable feature of European Jewish life. Archaeological digs at early Israelite settlements, dating back to around 1200 BCE, show a clear lack of pig bones, although some smaller farms existed. No major pig farms have ever been found, especially when compared to neighboring Philistine or Canaanite sites, which is a sign that Israel avoided pork long before Arabic influence. When Islam emerged in the 7th century CE, it actually adopted many existing Middle Eastern dietary rules, including the Jewish ban on pork. The only exception in Jewish law is called Pikuach Nefesh, which allows breaking almost any commandment, including eating pork, if it's needed to save a human life, like in cases of extreme starvation. In European Jewish law, for a land animal to be considered kosher or permissible to eat, it has to meet 2 specific physical requirements at the same time. It must have completely split hooves, and it must chew its cud. Cows meet both of these requirements, which is exactly why they are kosher. Pigs, on the other hand, only meet one. They have split hooves but do not chew their cud, making them forbidden. So, what are these 2 required signs? First, split hooves. The hoof has to be completely divided into 2 distinct parts. Second, chewing the cud, also known as rumination. This is when animals regurgitate partially digested food, or cud, from their stomach back into their mouth to chew it again before final digestion. Now, why are pigs specifically forbidden? The Torah actually calls out the pig as an example of an animal that has one sign but not the other. In Leviticus chapter 11 verse 7 it says, "And the pig, though it has a divided hoof, does not chew the cud, it is unclean for you." There's even a concept in Jewish tradition called the kosher facade. The pig is often seen as particularly deceptive because it shows off its split hooves while resting, so it looks kosher on the outside, but it's considered unclean on the inside because it doesn't chew its cud. Just to give a few more examples of non-kosher animals, remember, an animal must have both signs to be kosher. If it lacks even one, it's prohibited. For instance, the camel chews its cud but doesn't have a completely split hoof. The horse doesn't have split hooves and doesn't chew its cud. Rabbits and hares were historically described as chewing their cud or re-chewing food, but they don't have split hooves. Beyond the technical legal requirements, Jewish commentators have offered deeper symbolic reasons for these laws. Some say it's about self-discipline. The laws are seen as a way to instill holiness through everyday acts of discipline. Others point out that kosher animals are almost always non-predatory herbivores, like cows, sheep, and goats, and the prohibition on predators is often interpreted as a command not to absorb cruel traits into one's own personality. And finally, chewing the cud is sometimes viewed symbolically as a metaphor for reflection and rumination, reevaluating one's choices and behaviors instead of just acting impulsively. In both biological and biblical terms, chewing the cud refers to a very specific digestive process called rumination, which pigs just don't do. You might have seen pigs chewing their food with their teeth, but honestly, that's just regular chewing to swallow, pretty much like how humans eat. In the context of the Torah and Kosher laws, true cud chewers, or ruminants, like cows, sheep, and goats, have a multi-chambered stomach. They swallow their food, it gets partially digested in a special chamber called the rumen, and then they regurgitate that semi-digested ball, the cud, back into their mouths to chew it a second time. Pigs, by contrast, are what we call monogastrics. They have a simple single-chambered stomach just like humans do. Once they swallow their food, it doesn't come back up to be re-chewed. It just goes through their digestive tract in one pass. The Jewish term used in the Eurocentric Torah for chewing the cud is ma'alat gara, which literally means bringing up the cud. This really highlights the regurgitation part, not just the act of moving the jaws. Because pigs lack the biological hardware, the rumen, to bring up food for a second chew, they are classified as not chewing the cud. Now, pigs are known to be pretty vocal and active with their mouths, often smacking or grinding their teeth even when they're not eating. This can kind of look like the rhythmic chewing of a cow. But since there's no return of food from the stomach to the mouth, it doesn't meet the legal or biological requirement for rumination. So, in summary, for an animal to be kosher, it must be a ruminant. It has to bring up its food. Pigs are just biologically incapable of this, no matter how much they chew their initial meal. Ancient observers were, highly attuned to animal anatomy and behavior, often through everyday activities like butchery and ritual sacrifice. Even though they didn't have electron microscopes or anything like that, they had very clear ways to distinguish chewing the cud, or rumination, from just regular chewing. For one thing, they relied on direct observation of behavior. Ancient shepherds and farmers lived in constant proximity to their livestock, and the specific rhythmic behavior of ruminants, like cows, sheep, and goats, is pretty distinct. There's the pause. Ruminants graze, stop, and then later bring up food while resting to chew it again. And then there's the visible bolus. You can actually see the ball of food, the cud, travel back up the animal's throat. It's a visible physical event that anyone watching a cow for 10 minutes can spot. In contrast, pigs eat continuously and don't regurgitate food to chew it later. Even to an ancient observer, the lack of this re-chewing cycle was a clear behavioral difference. The most reliable science of the time came from ritual slaughter and butchery. When an animal is slaughtered, its internal organs are exposed. Ancient butchers could clearly see that cows and sheep have a complex, multi-chambered stomach, the rumen, reticulum, and so on, while pigs have a single, simple stomach, almost identical to a human's. The Babylonian Talmud, compiled between about 200 and 500 CE, contains surprisingly detailed anatomical descriptions, all derived from thousands of years of tradition, including the specific structures of animal stomachs and lungs. Even outside Judea, Aristotle in the 4th century BCE wrote detailed descriptions of the 4-chambered stomachs of ruminants, so this anatomical distinction was common knowledge among educated observers long before modern biology. In the ancient Near East, categories were often based on observable order. The facade concept comes into play here because a pig looks half right. It has the split hooves of a cow, but acts all wrong by eating like a dog or a human and not ruminating. It was viewed in Jewish tradition as a symbol of hypocrisy. On a practical level, ruminants are generally cleaner in their diet, eating only grass or hay, while pigs are omnivores that will eat almost anything, including waste. This observable difference in diet and digestion probably contributed to their classification as well. So, in short, the science back then was really just eyes and knives. And honestly, those were more than enough to tell the difference between a cow's digestive cycle and a pig's simple meal. In Jewish tradition, discovering the anatomical facts about pigs wasn't considered a risky path to a curse, but rather a necessary part of fulfilling a divine commandment. The Talmud does mention a specific curse related to pigs, but it is not directed at those who study or touch them for knowledge. The sages pronounced a curse specifically on those who raise pigs or dogs. This ruling actually emerged during a 1st century BCE civil war between Hasmonean brothers. During a siege of the Temple Mount, the besiegers sent up a pig instead of the expected sacrificial lambs, leading the sages to forbid the breeding of pigs entirely. Now, when it comes to touch versus study, while the Torah says you shall not touch their carcasses, this is a law regarding ritual impurity, not a literal physical curse. One could become unclean for a day, but honestly, this was a pretty common state for many ancient activities, like touching a human corpse or certain reptiles, and it was easily resolved through ritual immersion. Ancient Jews gained their anatomical knowledge through permissible and practical means. For example, external observation. You don't have to touch a pig to see that it doesn't chew its cud. Ruminants like cows visibly regurgitate food and chew it for long periods while resting, a behavior pigs clearly lack. Also, Jews lived alongside many cultures, like Romans or Philistines, who raised, slaughtered, and ate pigs. Knowledge of a pig's simple single-chambered stomach was easily observable in any marketplace where pigs were butchered by others. And let's not forget, ritual slaughterers were required to be experts in animal anatomy and pathology. They were trained to inspect organs like lungs and stomachs for defects. This professional class maintained a deep, technical understanding of internal biology as part of their holy work. The most important rule in Judaism is that saving a life overrides almost all other laws. Rabbis have long permitted using pig-derived medicine like insulin or heart valves because the prohibition is on eating the animal, not benefiting from it medically. And because of this life-first rule, modern Judaism looks favorably on scientific research, including the study of pigs for organ transplants, if it can save human lives. But the Talmud contains a specific curse regarding the raising of pigs. It is found in Tractate Bava Kama 82b and Tractate Menachot 64b, which state, "Cursed is the man who raises pigs, and cursed is the man who teaches his son Greek wisdom." The curse was established during a Hasmonean civil war, 1st century BCE, between two brothers, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. During the siege, Hyrcanus was besieging Aristobulus in Jerusalem. Despite the war, those inside would lower money over the wall, and those outside would send up lambs for the daily temple sacrifices. Then came the treachery. An elder familiar with Greek wisdom, which symbolized strategic treachery, advised the besiegers to stop the sacrifices. The next day they sent up a pig instead of a lamb. As the pig was being pulled up, it stuck its hooves into the temple wall. The Talmud records that the land of Israel shuddered at this desecration. In response, the sages cursed anyone who raised pigs, effectively banning the industry for Jews. Now, while the Torah only forbids eating pork, the Talmudic curse expanded this to forbid raising them or doing business with them. This is actually a stricter standard than for other non-kosher animals, like horses, which Jews can own and use for work. Traditionally, this ban applied specifically to the land of Israel to prevent the desecration of holy ground, though it became a powerful cultural taboo worldwide. Because the curse refers to raising pigs on the land, some modern Israeli kibbutzim have historically used a loophole. They raise pigs on elevated wooden or concrete platforms, so the animals' hooves never technically touch the soil of Israel. However, the pork law of 1962 remains the secular legal basis for restricting pig farming in most of Israel today. In the Torah and Talmud, curses are rarely aimed at general cultures but are usually directed at specific historical enemies, those who violate ethical laws or even internal religious rivals. The most significant and recurring curse on a specific people is against Amalek. In the Torah, Exodus 17:14 and Deuteronomy 25:17 through 19, God promises to utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. This was a response to a vicious and unnecessary attack by the Amalekites on the weak and elderly at the rear of the Israelite camp shortly after they left Egypt. Jewish law teaches that the actual nation of Amalek no longer exists, following their defeat by King Saul and King David. In later tradition, Amalek became a symbolic term for the epitome of ingratitude and any group or individual that represents incorrigible evil or anti-Semitism. A famous but often misunderstood curse occurs in Genesis 9:25. After Noah's son Ham saw his father's nakedness, Noah cursed Ham's son Canaan, saying, "Cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers." While this curse was on Canaan, the ancestor of the Canaanite nations, it was historically misinterpreted by others, not within the Jewish text, to justify racial slavery. The Talmud, Sanhedrin 108b, does mention Ham being smitten in his skin as a punishment for a specific violation on the ark, but the curse of servitude was explicitly directed at Canaan, not all descendants of Ham. In Deuteronomy 27, a formal ceremony is described where the Israelites stood on two mountains and recited a list of 11 curses for specific ethical violations. Cursed is he who degrades his parents, moves a neighbor's boundary marker, misleads the blind, perverts justice for orphans or widows, or takes a bribe. These were not against other cultures, but were internal laws to ensure a moral society within Israel. The Talmud and later liturgy include a blessing, which is actually a petition for destruction, called Birkat Haminim. It was directed at heretics and informers, groups that were seen as traitors to the Jewish community or who had separated themselves through deviant religious practices. Modern scholarship notes this was likely aimed at specific early sects, like the Sadducees or certain early followers of other faiths, who were seen as a threat to Jewish survival during periods of Roman persecution. The Talmud also records heated exchanges where sages cursed one another during intense legal debates. Rabbis might call each other idiots, brainless, or fools. In some accounts, a rabbi's withering stare was said to reduce an opponent to a heap of bones, though this is considered folkloric rather than literal law. Takeaway: Orit is the oldest Semitic language in the ancient region of Africa. It was used in the First Temple period, and then later Oromo, Ge'ez, Amharic, and Aramaic. These are all Afrocentric Semitic languages. Yiddish was created in the Common Era in Europe, and of course, the Talmud and Torah as well. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to join the tribe or hit like to show appreciation. See you next time.